Waiting for a moment for two other councillors to come in. Talk or sing amongst yourselves. Welcome to the meeting, colleagues. The tangent register is going round. I think we're all here. No apologies for absence. Item 4 is the confirmation of the Cabinet minutes, which is on page 5 to 12. Declarations of interest. Oh, sorry, apologise. Declarations of interest.
Thank you, Leader. I'm aware of a number of interests. I have circulated an email to members advising them that they need to declare personal, not a prejudicial interest in relation to several schools which are listed in each of the reports. So if any members have are a governor of any of the schools, which are St Albans, RC High, Cwmbran, Croeskeilog, Penyghan, Abersychan, Bryn Teg, Cwmffredor, Garn Teg, Victoria, Coediva Primary and Llantarnam Primary, or if anyone living with you or anyone with whom you have a close personal association works or attends the school, that's a personal interest. I'm aware that Councillor Cunningham is a governor of St Albans Roman Catholic High. Councillor Richard Clark is a governor at Croeskeilog. Councillor Gwynaira Clark, you're a governor at Bryn Teg and Garn Teg schools, and your granddaughter attends Croeskeilog School. And Councillor Daniels is a governor on Cwmbran High. I'm not aware of any other interest in relation to those specific schools. There's another interest in relation to item number 14, which is the Torfaen Leisure Trust. Councillor Lewis Jones has a personal and a prejudicial interest in relation to that particular item, being on the board of the trust. So I think Councillor Jones will be leaving just before that item is discussed. I'm not aware of any other interests, Leader. Thank you.
Item 4, which is the confirmation of the Cabinet minutes. So it's page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All agree those minutes? Sure. Thanks so much. Confirmation of the Cabinet minutes, page 13 to 20. So it's 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. All agree those minutes? Please show.
So it's got me down as giving my apologies, and I did give my apologies, but I was there at the meeting.
All right, I'm sure the officers will rectify that. Update on actions.
Thank you, Chair. They're just there for information unless members have questions.
Thank you. Now then, item 7 is the initial financial forecast for 2016-17, updates on 2017-18 and to 2019-20. Mr. Nigel Aurelius, over to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Leader. This is the usual report we bring at this time of the financial year. In terms of the key messages, at the moment we've got a forecast overspend, about nearly 1.4 million, but on a gross budget of over 260 million. It's forecast at the moment, so a lot of the overspend hasn't occurred, and remedial action will be taken where possible. We've made some assumptions on the achievement of savings, the capital budgets and the reserves, so I'll just quickly go through the report. I won't pick up the background, members will know that. There's a table there in 5.1 which shows you service by service where we are. We're not commenting on every service now in these reports going forward. We're just picking out the key issues. So we've got social care and housing. There's a pressure in children's, and largely that's down to additional demand, although there are some savings not achieved. But that's being offset by favourable projection in adults, which is a continuation of a similar theme to previous years. The social care management team are looking at that, particularly in relation to children's services, with a review to reviewing all the high-cost placements. In terms of month 4 position for social care, because obviously we're beyond Q1 now, that's showing an improving position. The overall net position is improved, but it's still continuing the trend. Adults is getting better, and children's is getting slightly adverse. The only other significant service area that's showing some pressure then is in relation to community services. The reasons are there within the report, and this is most definitely a one-year issue. The service area will use reserves to solve that, but have taken management action to review and realign the service area. This won't be an issue for 2017-18 going forward. The next part of the report then shows the detailed mitigations that we approved as part of the budget. So you've got a table in 6.1 of the service mitigations and the corporate mitigations, which shows, you know, bearing in mind there's nearly £7 million worth of mitigations, you know, we've already achieved nearly 5 million of that, and we've got about £1 million in high risk, and probably 800,000 in alternatives. Then we give a table with all the high-risk measures in there and a commentary around them and the position we're in and managing. Just picking up on the admin and business service. I mean, that was an ambitious saving of £1 million. It's been achieved in a base budget sense, but because we wanted to manage it sensitively with voluntary redundancies rather than compulsory redundancies, it's happened slightly later in the year than we planned, but I still think that's a magnificent achievement to pull that level of savings out and achieve it without compulsory redundancies. And we did anticipate some shortfall by putting financial resilience in the budget when we did it. There's some commentary on fees and charges, and then we've got a table then that shows the high-risk activities. And the alternatives that services are looking at to mitigate those. The next part of the report goes on to reserves, and it's all there for members. It shows the trend, it shows the detail coming out of the general fund balance, but the overriding message there is our reserves are falling, and they're falling because of commitments against them and the significant costs of change in letting people go and reconfiguring services. That's what reserves are there for, and we're using them appropriately, but they are falling. There's a section on capital, and you'll start to see the capital spend start to really ratchet up now over this year, next year, and the following years, as we really start building around 21st century schools. And largely this agenda could be it could be the cabinet for 21st century schools, the raft of reports that follow. But we are really starting to see the impact now, and starting to spend some money on new schools, and the detail is there for 16-17. Then there's just a small section on 17-18 and 18-19. Members will be aware that we've largely set a 2-year budget. We've written to all services. For the vast majority of services, they are all confirming that the mitigations that were approved and scrutinised as part of the 16-17 budget will be achieved and will be brought in, which means we won't be looking for you to reapprove those. We'll be just building those into the budget. So hopefully we'll get the benefit of the decisions that you took to do a 2-year budget. We have set targets for 18-19 and 19-20, and based on those parameters in 9.2, and then there's the broad outline of the timetable that we'll be working to in 9.3. But obviously some of that will be subject to change and iteration as we work through. So in conclusion, we've got an overspend position at the moment. It is being actively managed by the services in question. In community services, very definitely a 1-year issue, and in social care, it's a continuation of those issues we have to manage every year in terms of children's and adults.
Thank you, Nigel. Thank you for the report. Very good report. I don't know if the members are having the same problem as I'm having, but my computer is, got it. Right then, over to you, Anthony. Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Leader. And thank you, Nigel, for a sound report there. I remain particularly confident in both the processes and the personnel we've got working on our financial situation. The situation really doesn't need me to expand on what Nigel's just said, but I'm confident that it's all in hand. I think it's worth pointing to the 6.3 in the admin and business review that Nigel mentioned. I think it's a great credit to the people we've got working here that's a potentially very difficult process to take £1 million out of the budget. It affects lots of our staff, but I think that's been handled as sensitively as it possibly could, and has achieved the savings that we were looking for. I think that was a very tough balancing act to achieve, to be sensitive enough, because at the end of the day you're dealing with people's livelihoods, but also to reach the saving that we were depending on in the budget. So I'd like to thank everyone who's played a part in that, and to thank our staff, because it must have been difficult going through that in the last few months, and their professionalism and their dedication is worth noting today, I think. On the capital spend, it's good to see lots coming through from 21st Century Schools. I think it's sometimes overlooked because it's a decision that's been made, previously, but this council has stuck very steadfastly to our commitment of dedicating our capital budget to 21st Century Schools. That's not just an academic exercise, that's about our commitment to making sure that our children are going to be taught in facilities fit for the 21st century. And I don't think we should just sort of take that as a given or not comment on that. There's lots of other reports to come with some of the benefits of that later today. But it's not been an easy process. Change is never easy. But I think the state of the fabric of our school buildings now, compared to if we'd done nothing, is really a credit to all involved there. So just thank you, Nigel, for the report and for the work that all the staff do, ensuring our financial processes are sound and that the council in difficult times is well managed financially.
Well done, Anthony. Any comments from any other members? If not, you see the conclusions on page 31 and the recommendations. All agree, sure? Thank you very much. Well then, the rest of the agenda is dominated by education, and we're on now then to the item 8, which is 21st Century Schools outline business case for Thorwin Sixth Form Centre, and this is Dermot and John Tushenham. Over to you. You need to get comfortable in those chairs, so I think you're dealing with the next 6 items. Right then, you ready?
Thank you, Leader.
Off you go.
So the first report asks to seek approval to submit the outline business case to Welsh Government for a new sixth form centre replacing all current sixth forms in English medium schools. So to be clear, that's not Gwyn Clew. That is the sixth form at Cumbraen High School, St Albans and Crossy-Ceiliog Comprehensive School. So the key messages here: proposals to build a new sixth form, English medium sixth form in Cumbraen at Site 2, which is beside Morrison's in that locality, at the cost of £20 million. As always, and we've been through these discussions before, in the 21st Century Schools programme, that's 50% coming from Council, 50% coming from Welsh Government. We have to submit an outline business case. We've already had agreement for the strategic outline case that's been submitted previously. So that needs to be, the outline business case has to go to Welsh Government in order to secure their 50% contribution. We think we're looking at a 2 to 3 year timescale for the completion of the project, subject to all the necessary approvals, and we'll go through those. The reason why 2 to 3 years, and that's a big variation, is clearly subject to the consultations that need to take place, and the fact it's likely that we expect Welsh Government to have to consider some objections that they may receive during the process. But we'll look at the timescale as part of the report, and obviously we can answer specific questions as we go through it. A statutory consultation on the proposed closure of the English medium based sixth forms will need to take place in parallel with further development of the proposals to create the centre in Cumbraen. So that's one of the things we're specifically looking at, getting permission for it today. And again, we'll look at how those different processes fit, and there's a timescale included in the report, which again we can look at in more detail. So the business case is included as an appendix to the report, and obviously We have lots of experience now of completing those, and you've seen quite a few of them in the past, so that's in the appendix, and again, we can pick up issues as needs be. The strategic case for change remains unchanged from what we discussed in the strategic outline case in September 2015. So the project investment objectives are the same, they're detailed in the report. The building will need to be sized, we believe, for between 900 to 1,000 learners in order to accommodate all Torvines post-16 learners wishing to take A-level, with complementary level 2 and 3 qualification routes, with some room for growth. I have no doubt that as part of the consultation on the proposal, if this goes forward today, that will be the subject of quite a bit of discussion about exactly what the nature of that curriculum is going to look like. But that's how we're sizing it at the moment. And a master plan for the development of the whole site is underway with Welsh Government to look at what other uses might be on that site. 5.3 and following takes you through the economic and financial, commercial and financial case. I won't go through those in particular detail unless there are specific questions. Clearly, one of the things that we need to be mindful of when we come to look at the consultations will be about the position of Prossy, and we'll cover the issue about what's happening with Prosecutor in the next report. In terms of, if I can draw your attention specifically, however, into 5.5, one of the things that we know we've got more work to do on around the operating costs of the college is having further discussions with colleague Gwent. So one of the things the report outlines is that we're going to build the college. Council will retain ownership of the college, but we'll be in a strong partnership with colleague Gwent, who will actually operate the college. Now that's got some implications for us that we need to flag up. In terms of the operating costs, the funding models for sixth forms in local authority stewardship is different from the FE funding regs. So we will have to do more work with with Welsh Government and with colleague Gwent to have clarity around the operating costs going forward, because at the moment there's a slight variation and we have further work to do, and that will form part of the next consultation round if we get approval. In terms of the change management, there's an important implication I just need to talk about here. Moving from school-based regulations to local authority regulations to FE means that it's likely that we'll see redundancies in staff in our current sixth forms, because they won't be guaranteed the right of employment in a different employer, i.e. with FE. Now, what's happened in previous circumstances, where, for example, in Blaenau Gwent, is that staff who were qualified to do the job were offered an interview by colleague Gwent as part of the process. And I suppose what's different between what would happen if this was in the local authority sort of situation as opposed to local authority FE is that we have a compact agreement in place, meaning that we try and slot staff in. That won't be the case in this instance. So there will be a competition in effect for colleagues who want to move from school-based to FE, the FE as their employer. That means that we calculate there'll be quite a wide range of potential redundancy costs, which we've always known about through the different iterations of these proposals, because obviously we've been through a few. And at the moment, we're estimating the cost to us to be around £600,000 to £700,000, but that's within a range of between 300k, best case scenario, so 300,000, and up to as much as 1.6 million. Now, we can't be more specific at the moment, simply because we don't know who's going to be interested in moving into FE, how many of those posts will go, how many people want to stay, we don't know until we actually get into that mapping exercise. And staff, of course, need to think about this and take advice, and that will start to happen through the consultation process if it goes forward. We've got really good experience within both the education service and HR in change management processes. So, for example, we have upwards of £800,000 worth of change management that we deal with every year within education because of changes in schools. So while this isn't something that is a small issue, it's an expensive one, and clearly has an impact on individual members of staff, potentially, it is something that we're confident that we can manage. So those costs will need to be met from specific earmark reserve from underspends that occur corporately or within the education service. And clearly that's something that we'll monitor very closely as part of any change management process. Excuse me. So on page 36 of the bundle, that takes us into the timelines as we see them at the moment. So key sort of dates to pick out, obviously here we are in September, we have the report to Cabinet. We'd anticipate going out to consultation between October and December and concluding consultation then, so hoping to come back to Cabinet probably in January, maybe December, but probably January in all likelihood. And if there was further approval at that point, we'd publish statutory notices, a process I'm sure you're familiar with by now. There's an objection period that runs for 28 days. That takes us up to the end of March. And then the objections and the objection report go to Welsh ministers at that point within 35 days of the end of the objection period, which takes us to April. And then we can't be more specific about the timescales that Welsh Government would have to look at those objections. That's obviously an issue for them. But we've already had a number of discussions with the Welsh Government, and they're aware of the urgency with which we want to find a solution collectively. But I can't be more specific than that. So the other dates, the key dates on those 2 pages, just to be mindful of, would really be then, well, when do we think the thing, if it goes ahead, when do we think the design and construction would be completed? We'll be looking to appoint a contractor in April 2017, once we know the Minister's decision, the Cabinet Secretary's decision, with ideally, subject to everything working to these timescales, site completion for July 2019 for a September opening. I've already said next steps beyond this will clearly be about consultation with all stakeholders, and that will be all the statutory stakeholders, clearly all schools, parents, pupils, and everyone else that we always talk to, treating a critical consultee in this process. And that's something that we intend to get on with quickly, subject to approval. 9.1 outlines those actions then that we'd take next, Leader. There's clearly a plethora of detail in the associated appendices as well, but I hope that gives you a clear run-through of what we're proposing, and any questions or clarifications we can offer, we're happy to do so.
Thank you for that, David. I think the way we'll work this is that members can ask questions and then it'll be summed up by David Joel, who's the Cabinet Member for Education. So are there any members that got any comments they want to make? Are you happy to leave it like that? Right, thanks for that. Dave Joel, do you want to sum up?
My thoughts. Well, clearly, I'm hoping that Cabinet members will support it unanimously. It is incredibly bold a decision that we're asked to take, and I wouldn't want any one of you to underestimate that. But I think it's the best thing to happen in post-16 education in the borough for decades. And I know that it doesn't meet everybody's satisfaction, that's for sure, and I'm sure that there will be, through the consultation process, quite a bit of to and fro-in. But that's expected in a venture like this. We've thought long and hard about it, and the thing that we kept coming back to all the time was that we need to rationalise the provision of sixth form education or post-16 education in the borough, because it was indeed, to put the best kind of spin on it, a bit lopsided. If you lived in Cwmbran, then you were adequately serviced. If you lived north of Cwmbran, then it was an ad hoc arrangement at the best and non-existent at the worst. Some people have said to me, why build it, why have it built in Cwmbran? There are many, many good reasons why perhaps it could have been built up in the north of the borough, but none of those stacked up when you considered really, really important things like links and indeed a proper viable space for this kind of institution. To balance that out, down in the Cwmbran area, all the links that we perceive as being very, very attractive already exist, and that was also very, very attractive to partners in this arrangement as well. But the fundamental thing that we come back to, the very, very important feature of all of this, is providing a stable and progressive post-16 education for those learners coming on and going into the future. And I know I've said it before, and it may sound a little bit repetitive, but I'll say it again because I think it is incredibly important. With the other legislation that comes along in terms of looking after future generations, then whilst this isn't a product of that, it does marry with that in some kind of symbiotic way, and I think it is very, very important to remember that particular point. Basically then, I hope that people will support this. I hope the Cabinet members will support this, because it is a step in the right direction. It's something the Council has been looking at for several decades without any real sight of a goal. Now we have that sight. We're halfway through the process. We would ask you to support the notion of going out to consultation, because that is a very important step in this progress. But bear in mind, when you're considering what you're going to do, that this is being constructed, it's being pushed with the best interests of our post-16 learners in view. And that, for me at least, is sufficient to warrant support 100%.
Well done. Anthony, do you want to make a comment?
I'd just like to very much support that contribution by Councillor Yell. I think this does remove a key inequity in our education system. You know, with any change like this, you have to first justify why the status quo isn't an option. I really don't think the continuation of the status quo, where there isn't equal provision for children in the north of the borough, is tenable. So I think we need to do something about it. This also, of course, adds something that's very attractive to me, which is the breadth of post-16 opportunity that we can give our young people under a plan like this. I think that's very important. The sites, Councillor Yell mentioned, and I very much agree, the accessibility, especially with the X24 bus coming from the north of the borough of this site, and I think the attractiveness that it will have to young people as well, given the potential location, is a prize that's worth getting. I'm glad that Dermot in his presentation mentioned the sort of the sensitivity with which we need to deal with the transition for staff. I think that needs to be handled in line with our principles as a council. There are lots of staff in our schools with much to offer who may want to come across, and I think that's key that we get the best of both worlds in that respect, because you know, the provision will be, the quality of provision will be, as well as about the building and about the surroundings, will be about the quality of teaching staff and leadership in the institution. So I think that's key that we get that question right, and that staff that have a lot to offer a sixth form potentially get the opportunity to do so. But very much welcome the report and very much support it.
Good. Nobody else? Well, it is a very bold venture, and we do take bold ventures anyway as a local authority. Thank you, Dermot and Tush, and also Dave Yowell and the Chief Executive, I know, played a big part in this, and our finance people for putting it together. Long overdue, the case has been stated, so all members in agreement, please show. Thanks very much for that. Now then, we're on now to item 9, when this machine works. In just a moment. And this is, let me get this right. Again, this is 21st Century School, business case for the replacement of Crossy Kellyog School. Over to you, Dermot. You've got a permanent seat there for about an hour and a half.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, so obviously the next phase, this report clearly is interrelated with the previous report, as you'll see as we go through it, because in the previous report we've talked about the removal of sixth forms. So in this report we've woven through, and we've had discussions with the governing body before we've written this report to make sure that they're happy with how we've constructed it. We're talking about obviously a rebuild of Crossy Kellyog. The question will be about what it is we're going to rebuild, and you'll see as we go through the report that we've talked about a rebuild for 11 to 16 and for 11 to 18, because clearly we'll need to see the outcomes of the consultations on the post-16 proposal before we can decide which of those two options we look at. But I'll try and make that clear as we go through the report. In terms of key messages, the proposal is to replace the 11 to 16 element, but as you'll see, and I've already said it, we're also looking at the potential for 11 to 18 contingent in the other consultations. The cost for 11 to 16 is 30 million and 11 to 18 is 36 million in terms of the rebuild costs. And again, 50% of the investment would come from Welsh Government. In this case, we're now at the full business case stage to go to Welsh Government to secure its 50% contribution. As I've said, the next point really is about making sure that we coordinate the consultations around this proposal with the post-16 proposals, so we come to a decision about what is going to be finally built in terms of either 11 to 16 or 11 to 18. The current capacity of the school is 1,350 pupils. The 11 to 16 capacity of the new build will be reduced to 1,200 in order to reduce the number of surplus places in the borough, which clearly is a target that we still have to address. However, it will need to be sufficiently sized, obviously, to accommodate all of the existing pupils at the point of transfer. I think the background is well known in this. Again, the report goes through in terms of the issues and findings of the strategic case, economic, commercial, financial and management cases that we've talked about previously. So unless there are specific questions, I won't go through those in detail, and there's further detail on the appendices. But obviously we'll be happy to answer questions on those at the end. 5.7 refers you to the time scale, again, around the consultation process and when we think how that will proceed. So again, key dates here is subject to approval today. We'll be looking to go out to consultation in parallel with the post-16 consultation in October, so that the community see this as a package, because clearly they are interrelated. And as always, we'll be very mindful that we stage that in a way that no one could suggest that we predetermined the outcome of either. It really is a meaningful and open consultation. That consultation will run through, same as the other one, to November, December. We'd look to report back to you in December, but more likely in January. If approved by Cabinet, the publication of statutory notices would happen January, February, and that would conclude around March. And the final decision on the proposal for 11 to 16 capacity then would be taken. Publication of the Welsh Minister's decision on removal of the sixth form is something we'll need to negotiate with them and wait for them. That'll be an issue for the Minister to determine. So we'd be looking, in terms of the actual ones that's going to get built, ones that are going to happen, that we'd see phase one, which will be the completion of the new building in July. But clearly, on that particular site, the existing school would remain in place until the new building was actually completed, because obviously we need to put the children somewhere while we build the new building. So the site is big enough to hold the new building. The demolition would happen, we would hope, as quickly as possible once that move's been complete, as clearly there are issues around having a building open like that. We can't tell you the date of that at this point. We'll advise Cabinet at a later date when the demolition and completion of the external works would happen. So in terms of consultation, I've already said we'll need to go out to consultation in October, subject to approval. And really that's it in a nutshell. Again, it's Crossy Kellogg's a school that really needs urgent attention, and is in a very poor condition. So if there are any questions or issues, we can clarify.
Right, thanks for that. I know Richard Clark wants to make a comment.
Can I just come on that? I fully supported the previous report to end the inequality of post-16 provision within Torfaen. So it would be churlish now at this late stage to say anything in respect of the possible loss of the sixth form at Crossy Ceiliog. My greatest concern, and I think you touched on it there at the end, is the fabric of the building. Many, many, many moons ago, I think I left there in 86, it was a poor quality fabric then. We're so many years on now, I'm trying not to count them personally, but we're so many years on now, and it really is letting the school down. The water cascades down the central staircase in what I call the West Building. So for the benefit of the learners there, both future learners there, it's only right and proper that we look at the school and the new school. So I fully support the report, and I also commend you for the foresight to have a twin-track approach just in case, regrettably, the previous report fails. I think it's only sensible and prudent, so you to be commended for that. So I will be supporting this report.
Good, thank you, Richard. Anybody else? If not, David, you all?
Thank you, Leader. Again, thanks for the input by my colleague there. I can go a bit further back than 1986. I was one of the first pupils that ever went to Crossy Kellogg when it was a grammar school, when it was newly built in 1959. And I'm surprised, gobsmacked actually, at the deterioration over that period. I suppose 50 years is a long time. But clearly there is a strong case for a new school. The issue here is whether or not it's 11 to 16 or 11 to 18. And we have talked, Dermot has talked to the governors and satisfied them, I think, to a certain degree, that our intentions are honourable in the sense that we're not predetermining anything and we're not running away with the issue before the ink is dried on agreements. Because we have, or there is in existence, technology to devise a plan that can incorporate both 11 to 16 and 11 to 18. So should we get the go-ahead, it will be in 11 to 16. If we don't, then clearly we have to consider the 11 to 18 option. But beneath all of this building work, if you like, and the technology, there's the issue that it is related to the previous discussion of rationalising post-16. And it would be daft in the extreme to go ahead with rationalising or attempt to rationalise post-16 education with the construction of a post-16 establishment and then allow sixth forms to coexist, and that is daft. In any event, the Welsh Assembly government, I think, would laugh that out of court. But in any event, this notion is in part predicated on the earlier one, the post-16 solution. So it goes without saying that I'm fully supportive of it, but there is, in a rational and sensible way, a proper progression there, if you like. So I would hope that everybody around the table would identify that there is a sense where these projects are interrelated, interlinked, interdependent, and to vote on one in a positive way and to consider voting any other way with the second one is unthinkable. So here we go. I hope everybody is satisfied that we are moving in the right direction with this and would give it their undivided support.
All agreed, all support. Thanks very much. Thank you, Dermot. On now then to item 10, which is the business case for Penny Garn, I think it is. Yeah, Penny Garn. Over to you, Dermot.
Thank you, Leader. So this is obviously to seek approval for the business justification case for the remodelling and refurbishment of Penny Garn Community Primary, and the proposal to submit it to Welsh Government. Previously, I think we spent £350,000 in Penny Garn. So obviously what we're looking at here is a very much more significant investment of £4 million in the buildings and site. And obviously there's a band aid priority in our 21st Century Schools programme. We achieved a phenomenal amount with the 350k, much more than I was anticipating. So this will be a really transformational investment in the school and in the community. As always, 50% of the funding would be funded by us and 50% from Welsh Government. And the reason for submitting the business justification case is to get agreement from Welsh Government to secure its 50% contribution. In this instance, we think the investment in the building and site will take approximately 2 years to complete. Now, the reason for that, just to be clear, is, of course, this is going to be a live site. Pupils will be on site while these works are underway. So we need to stagger and plan that investment over periods where pupils, obviously, where the school is closed, but there will be some times when the site is actually live and pupils are in place. So necessarily it takes longer to achieve that investment and the building outcome. So in terms of issues in finding, Penny Garn is currently a grade BC school in terms of its condition, and to get that up to grade A or B, we need that following investment. So top of the second page in the report, it gives you a little breakdown of where we think that £4 million is going to be spent in terms of improvements to the library, ICT intervention, nurture group, etc. For our schools, play therapy, the school already invests in its own play therapist, so this will provide some additional space there as well. Did I just say 4 million? Well, I really meant 3.65. Remodelling and refurbishment of the kitchen, main hall and community areas. Changes to the Flying Start building. So obviously Flying Start already is in place and shares the site. So to improve the general usability of space within the schools. Remodelling to improve breakfast club access. Obviously a really key part of what the school provides at the moment in terms of its service to the whole community beyond the school statutory day. Improved external play areas within the foundation phase for the youngest children on site, and then clearly issues to maintenance around roofs, walls, windows and so on. So it will be an absolutely transformational investment for the school. I've talked about already the fact that it will take 2 years to complete because of the way that the site will need to operate with pupils and contractors sharing the space. And what I should say in that is clearly we've got lots of experience, as do the contractors that we use, in ensuring the safety of all site users at a time when you've got construction going on in a school site. So we have no concerns that will cause us undue delay or any difficulties. And colleagues from Neighbourhood Services have lots of experience in managing those sorts of situations. So in terms of consultation, we've had officers from our service and from neighbourhoods have had significant discussions with the head teacher, the chair of governors, and representatives from the school, and also with Cronbridge, because don't forget we invested previously in placing 1.2 classes from Cronbridge on the Pennygarn site. That continues. So Cronbridge are a significant partner in the school. We'll make sure that work continues and that in no way their work is undermined or those pupils are disadvantaged, and obviously the same for Flying Start as well. So Leader, again, this is something that will make a significant difference to the fabric of this school. It will really transform, I think, the learning environment for the children there, and will make a significant difference to parents coming on site and other potential uses by the community, which I know that the staff and the governing body are interested to look at going forward.
Right, thank you, Dermot. Any members want to make a comment? If not, then over to you, David.
Thank you, Leader. Again, it's another very, very necessary and very, very worthwhile project. I believe that once it's completed, it will be money well spent. I'd like to reiterate the one concern that might be exercising people's minds, and that is because in effect there will be dual usage over the period of the project. That is, the school will actively continue to operate whilst works are going on. There is an underlining, if you like, of our commitment to safety first. That's clearly understood, and we wouldn't allow anything to go ahead unless there was absolute 100% certainty that safety was the top priority. I'd also like to comment on the last thing that Dermot said, and that is the hope by the school governors and by the authority, the LA, and the community itself, that the school can be perhaps better utilised in terms of a community issue as well. And I know that that's something that the Leader is very, very keen to see happening right throughout the borough if it was possible. But certainly it will be, on completion, something that can be used in that way. And Pennygarn is an area, or Trevethin and Pennygarn are areas that could well do that kind of facility. But essentially it's improvement of the school. And I've said it before in other contexts, that you can have, as long as you have good teachers, good teaching practices, good leadership, kids will survive and thrive in whatever the environment. But if that learning culture is wrapped in something like this, improved state-of-the-art facility, then we can only wonder at the enhanced state of their education performance and progress. So again, 100% I would support it, and I hope that everybody else around the table feels the same way.
Right, thank you for that. All agree the recommendation, Shaw? Thanks very much. Now then, we're on to item 11, which is Abersacan and Brinteg Nursery, Comfort Primary School and Garnteg Primary School, and this is about the starting date. Dermot.
Thank you, Leader. So, in this report, we're seeking to approval to modify the implementation dates in the statutory notices for Abersacan, Brinteg, Comfort, Garnteg and Victoria schools, published on the 2nd of March 2016, from September 2017, when we thought those changes would be able to be brought into being, and move that now to the 1st of September 2018. Cabinet obviously agreed on the 12th of July of this year to close Abersacan, Brinteg Nursery and Victoria primary schools, and then extend provision at Comfort Primary and Garnteg with effect from September of 2017. The decision was subject to the conclusion of an application to the courts for judicial review, which resulted in an order of the court refusing permission to bring proceedings for a review after an oral hearing. So those proceedings have now all been exhausted. And as I said, the order of the court refused permission. So the time taken for such proceedings, plus allowing the time during which the application for permission to appeal may have been brought, we had to wait 28 days or thereabouts at the end of August, meant that that's put excessive pressure on the timetable. Clearly, one of the things that as Council we're really sort of focused on, as the service we're focused on, is making sure that learners aren't disadvantaged in any way that we can avoid. So we want to be absolutely secure that if we're closing a school and completing building works, moving pupils to another school, that those works are complete on time, so that there's no break or any sort of instability for learners, particularly for all learners, but obviously we're thinking about closing. Well, the primary school, very young children will be moving, nursery-age pupils, so we wouldn't want any impact on their starting school, for example. So we want to be absolutely sure that we've got the time that we need to complete those works. The whole judicial review application process really put a lot of pressure on our timescales. Furthermore, discussions with the Coal Authority about the groundwork engineering scheme also took more time than we anticipated. Those have now concluded, and because of the remediation works that are going to be required, because we've always given a commitment from the very beginning of this process that we'd take every advice that we needed to make sure that any works that we did on the Comfort site in particular were absolutely safe. And I know that's something that Cabinet were really impressed upon us before. All of those discussions have now happened. We've got a technical solution in place, but it's a bit more protracted than we thought it was going to be. So because of both of those pressures, in order to deliver all four schemes together, that was always the intention, we now feel it's safest to make sure we can deliver that on time for September 18, rather than really take an unnecessary risk that it might be ready, and we don't think it will be, for September 2017. So really, that's this report in a nutshell. We want permission then to change that date.
Right, thanks, Dermot. Any members want to make Gwynaira?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Obviously, my views are well known on the school closure, Victorian and Brinteg, but what I wouldn't do, it would be very irresponsible of anyone not to look at the safety aspect of this particular site. And for that reason and that reason alone, I would certainly support the recommendation.
Right, thanks for that. Any other members want to make a comment? David?
Yeah. Well, I think that both Dermot and indeed Gwynaira put their finger on the pulse of the rationale here, and that is safety first. We've always said, and I know it hasn't necessarily been taken as such by certain quarters, but it's always been emphatically our view that whatever we do, it has to be driven by safety first. There are other elements within the mix that have caused us to have to come here and ask for the support of Cabinet to extend the dates, as it were. We did consider for a split second doing the whole project in a step-by-step approach, but that created so many disadvantages and confusions for kids going forward that played into the mix. So it was always going to be the case that we would have to ask for permission to extend the thing, but at base it's the safety first aspect. We were advised that by a team of surveyors that we commissioned that a different solution would provide us with the adequate safety first precautions, but we needed, and if it's seen as a belt and braces job, then so be it. So at the risk of holding the thing up for 12 months, we believe it's absolutely the right thing to be doing because of the safety first aspects of it. And I'm sure that everybody else around the table would agree that that has to be a prime consideration. And although it's inconvenient in the grand scheme of things, inconvenience matters very little when weighed in the balance against the safety of kids and other users of these sites.
Right, thanks for that. To see the recommendations, please show. Thank you for that. Right, then now we're on to item 12, which is Coidiva School. Again, Dermot, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Leader. So, the purpose of this report is to seek approval to carry out design work and issue a tender invitation for the replacement of the infant block that was destroyed at Coidiva in the fire in the arson attack on the 1st of January 2016. Excuse me. Furthermore, to recommend, subject to the approval of Council, to fund the replacement at a cap of 3.7 million. I'll go through the detail of how we get to that figure. So Coidiva, obviously, the entire infant block was completely destroyed. There was nothing left of it other than the concrete slab, which itself is also unusable going forward back in New Year's Day in last January. The Council's insurer excuse me, will contribute £2.95 million to the replacement building. I think that's fair to say that that's a reasonable amount. We're very happy that we've come to a satisfactory solution with the insurer. But I have to say it's been very reasonable throughout the entire process. We're very quick off the mark on the day that it happened, and it really enabled us to keep all those pupils on site. And to put interim arrangements in place. So we think that 2.95 million is the best possible solution we can come to with the insurer. So there are two options then for replacement. People who've been to the site will remember that it was originally an infants and juniors site with two separate schools, two separate head teachers, governing bodies and so on, albeit on the same site with a shared access road, which isn't the best shared access road, but a shared access road. When the schools came together under one governing body and head teacher, obviously we didn't physically connect the two buildings. They were just two separate buildings on the site. So in terms of the two options, we can just get on with rebuilding it exactly where it was on the right hand of the site when you go in, where we think it will cost between £3.1 and £3.3 million, or to reposition it and link it to the the remaining building, and that would cost, we think, up to £3.7 million. The linked option is clearly our preferred option, because that will bring the school together in one block. I'll go through some of the reasons for that, why I think that's a good idea in a second. Regardless of which option Council takes, we'll still need to approve a further contribution, because that 2.95 million is the cap that we're going to get from the insurer. So why go for the linked option, I suppose? So operationally, it's not ideal to have two separate buildings. If we can avoid it, that leads to further logistical issues. It's not impossible. The school operates like that for a long period of time. Lots of other schools do, but clearly it is beneficial from a managerial and operational viewpoint to have the school linked. There is an opportunity here to address the legacy of the separate buildings at Coidiva, funded obviously mostly by that payout from the insurer by repositioning the new building. In terms of curriculum benefit, we think that that will deliver some benefits in terms of how the school can deploy its staff and organise its curriculum as well. And obviously, if we were building a new site now from scratch, we wouldn't build it with two separate buildings in the way that we might have to here. So the demountable accommodation that's currently on site, just to point out as well, is being paid for by the insurance company. We know that we will pick up the cost of rental for that if we don't vacate it by December 17. Yeah. So any overrun on that, we also need to be mindful of costs in the region of £10,000 a month. for those buildings. So this is clearly time sensitive, not only in terms of the money cost of it, but clearly those pupils are in demountable classrooms. They're very nice, they're luxurious, but they're demountable classrooms, and lots of compromises have had to be made by the school in order to make that work. So we really, we need to make a decision and get on with that tender process as quickly as possible. So consultation to date is focused largely on discussing the needs of the school with the school. John and his team and myself have been having ongoing discussions with the chair and with the head teacher, and obviously with officers from neighbourhoods and resources about how we can move forward. The head teacher is very, very reasonable in the way that she sees what we need to accomplish. She understands she's not going to get an all. Originally, I think the school would have loved to have had the whole thing rebuilt, knocked down the junior side as well, and wouldn't that be great? But that's not the position we're in. So the head is working very closely with us to get the best possible solution out of every pound that we can attract for the build. So clearly, we'll need wider consultation. The community on that side have a vested interest. The community have been fantastic, and I'd like to put on record our thanks to everybody in Coidiva for being so understanding. Clearly, the school was burnt down. It was something beyond beyond our control. But the community were absolutely fantastic in terms of really being understanding about the traffic, the works traffic that had to come on that site. And clearly, we hope that they will continue to be understanding over the reconstruction phase, because there will be further disruption. We will certainly look at how we can ensure that that site, if possible, has the best possible traffic solution as part of the traffic impacts assessment that we do as well, because we know that will be a consideration for the community. So, again, Leader, if there are any questions or issues we can clarify.
Right, thank you for that, Dermot. Any questions from members? If not, any questions? No? Yeah, Anthony, go on. Oh,
sorry.
That's better. That's better. I can get on now. I'm glad to hear that about the traffic situation, as lots of us have wards with schools at the end of sort of narrow streets. We all know the problems that can be generated there. I was going to ask about the opinion of the head teacher and the governors about the preferred option, and that they're of the view, are they, that it's definitely worth the extra money. And the other point I was just going to make is to welcome the work of council officers I know in education and beyond. We visited the school not long after the incident, and the rate at which they'd all sort of clubbed together and sort of worked towards getting things back up and running was impressive. And it's good to hear that that's been a smooth process. But yeah, I obviously welcome your recommendation about the fact that we prefer the extra for the linked option, but just to see what the opinion of the head and governing body was.
And I think, the school, ideally, I would be amiss if I didn't say they would like a new school and they would like a rebuild. They understand that that's clearly not possible. So from their point of view, I think having that linked option, and some of the works that we've been able to achieve because of what's happened with the fire means that we'll have a far better curriculum offer in terms of outside learning as well, by having that linked option and keeping some of those improvements that we have. So I think quite firmly that would be the view of the school.
Thanks for that. David, do you want to make a comment?
I'll be very brief. Going back to Councillor Hunt's question, clearly in a perfect world, not only would the school personnel, the head and the chair of the governors prefer a new school, we prefer a new school as well. That would be great. But I think with the building the other side of the existing workable part of the school is perhaps the best option that is available. As Dermot has said, if we just built a school roughly in the same place on a like-for-like basis, it would still exacerbate some of the problems that have existed traditionally, because initially the school was built as two separate schools, two separate institutions. Building at the other side of the existing building and having a walkway, having a link, sort of pulls it in and makes it more accessible and more in a very sort of aesthetic way. It makes it look and feel like one school, and it will operate as one school in that sense. As I said, and I repeat, I think it's the best that we can come up with, failing the total rebuild, the total new build, which is not on the cards. This is the best on offer. I know the head is sympathetic to the issues. I've talked to her on several occasions, and she understands that they ain't going to have a new school built, that's for sure. But she is very, very excited, if you like, about having this new configuration. So I hope that we can okay the extra spend that we have to do, and I hope that everybody supports this, because in a sense this is, although we are pushed into considering these options as a consequence of the mindless vandalism that resulted in the fire, it can be seen in a sense as part of the whole ethos of the 21st Century Schools programme, where we want to provide and need to provide the best we can under the circumstances. And I see this as, although it's not directly involved in that process, it is certainly and can be seen as something very, very integrated, if you like. So I hope everybody understands what we want, what we need, and I hope that everybody will approve it and vote accordingly.
Right, thanks for that. You see the recommendations there. All agree the recommendations show. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Dermot. And Tush, you didn't have a mention, but I know how important part you've played in this, and indeed all other officers. We can be proud of the way that we are transforming our schools in Torloin, and we're destined to have probably the best schools in Gwent, if not in Wales, by the time we finish this. Next item is item 13, which is Richard Edmonds. It's the appointment of a strategic partner. I'm sure you'll explain this, Richard.
I hope so, Bob.
Sure
It'd be difficult to make a decision otherwise.
Yeah.
Morning, members. You'll probably recall that back in December last year, you gave us approval to go out to market and procure a strategic partner to provide support to the Council similar to that which we received around the admin and business support function. Through the course of the spring and summer, we worked up a specification, and we have subsequently run a procurement exercise through the Consultancy One framework. We've got to a point where we have a successful supplier, and we're seeking Cabinet approval to appoint. I thought it would be worth me just drawing out some of the key points in Section 5. The whole section sets out exactly what we've done. The key information really starts in 5.6. The Council's received a single tender submission, and whenever you receive a single tender submission, it's very important that you assess and analyse and undertake due diligence appropriately. Andy Maisie, the Head of Strategic Procurement, and myself invited the single supplier to come in and talk through their proposals to us. It was a good discussion, lots of challenge. What we had back satisfied us in terms of the organisation being capable of delivering strategic partner support to the Council as we progress any of the future strategic reviews that we'd like to take forward. Essentially, subject to Cabinet now approving the appointment of this supplier, we'll be able to engage with them on a whole range of transformation activities, and we'll be doing so on the basis that any spend will deliver far more in savings than it costs the Council initially, as per the Admin and Business Support Review itself. So what I'm looking for this morning, Leader, members of Cabinet, is approval to appoint this single supplier for a 3-year term with an option to extend by a further year. Thank you.
Good, thank you for that. Very brief and to the point. Any members going to want to ask a question? Anthony?
Sorry, just very briefly, I think it's key that when we appoint partners like this, we do it on the basis of what they can offer us. You know, in a controlled environment, I think that the way that we took forward the Admin and Business Support Review was a good one, a good sort of example where, you know, they came in and did what they could to add value, and then we took the model and used it ourselves. I think that gives us the best of both worlds. You're having someone come in from outside to give a different perspective, someone who can maybe see the wood from the trees, but then you take it in a way that you can sort of implement, you know, sensitively to the organisation, using people who know the organisation, know the people they're dealing with. So I think it's very key that we sort of continue with that. Obviously, the use of external consultancies is something that sometimes generates some controversy, but as long as you keep that as a principle and also make sure that the money you spend achieves greater savings, so it's value for money, I think that's the key principles to support the report.
Right, thank you for that. Any other members want to make a comment?
Yeah. Could I just ask, are we allowed to know the name of the partner?
I can talk to you about that outside the meeting, Councillor Jones, but for the report purposes, I'm not clear as to whether I can disclose.
Anybody else want to make a comment? If not, all please show on the recommendations. Thanks so much. All right. Now then, we're on to item 14, which is the Leisure Trust. Lewis is leaving, I see. Right then. Duncan, over to you.
I'll just take that. This report asks you to make decisions on 4 items, and it's useful just knowing those at the beginning, just to see what I'm going to cover, because it's a bit of a pick mix. Since July 2013, the Leisure Trust has been operating as a non-profit distributing organisation, and it operates the council facilities at 5 locations: Cumbrian Stadium, Pontypool Active Living Centre, Fairwater Leisure Centre, Bowden Active Living Centre and Pontypool Ski Centre. The Trust have requested that the funding agreement that we concluded with them back in 2013 be renewed for a 5-year period, and that would cover the period from the 1st of October through to September 2021. I'll come to that in a moment. The Trust have also requested that the support services service level agreement, that's the services we provide for the Trust to operate, be renewed, and I'll come to that in a moment. The Trust have also requested that the Council provide a loan underwriting facility for redevelopment works proposed at Pontypool Active Living Centre, and I'll cover that in detail as we go through the report. The background to the report, section 4, I won't go through that laboriously. Members know about the setting up of the Trust and its operation for 3 years. So I'll cut to the quick here and move on to the request for renewal. The request is that the renewal is for a 5-year period. The initial period was 3 years, as I pointed out earlier. In requesting the 5-year extension, the Chief Exec of the Leisure Trust has set out a reasoning, and they said that the Trust has operated for 3 years successfully and delivered over and above its requirements. There's been an overall increase in numbers using the leisure facilities. A centre that was closed, they're referring here to Fairwater, on a Sunday has reopened as a result of their activity, and they say that no complaint from the council, there's been no complaint from the council in relation to the delivery of services. Now, it's a two-way street in agreement, so in 5.5, and I won't go again through this laboriously, there are expectations on the Trust. There are past expectations, which I'll come to in a moment, and they're meeting those. But if it goes forward, 5.5 sets out what the Council would require the Trust to do to enable us to renew the agreement. Now, the funding agreement, I'm on to 6 now, para 6. Funding agreement and service fee. They're bound together within what's called the funding agreement and service fee element. That's a legal agreement, and that includes a number of schedules, which the most important of which is Schedule 1, which is the service specification, but includes a range of other things, including the leases and what have you. Some of those have been, Schedule 1 has been amended slightly. The remainder of the agreement remains as it was, apart from any changes that would be introduced as a result of the extension for the 5 years. And the changes that were introduced are set out under 6.2, and they're very, very minor changes to wording, redundant aspects of that agreement that have become apparent over the 3 years. So it's very, very minor changes to those Schedule 1. Now, the full set of documentation, the agreement, including the schedules, and the service level agreement, which I'm going to come to in a moment, has been placed in the members' room. So members have had the ability to have a look at that and see what's being proposed. In terms of the service fee and service delivery, essentially the council pay the Leisure Trust. And back in 2013, the amount that was paid to the Leisure Trust was $1,885,000. Now, over the years, an agreement was reached when the original agreement was reached with the Trust, that there would be a reduction each year of 4.67. And if you go to paragraph, oops, bear with me, paragraph 7.2.1 and the table, if you run through the table there, you can see that over the 3 years operation of the Trust, this is at the top of the table, an overall reduction in the service fee of 241,000, just over that, has been achieved over those 3 years. In terms of moving forward, the Trust have requested that the step down, as I've called it in this report, of 4.67 is retained for at least a 3-year period of the new 5-year period. And for reasons set out in the report, I think that's a reasonable request, and I recommend that we accept that. Essentially, this will give them the certainty they require for another 3 years in terms of the step down to allow them to plan. They've carried out significant improvements at Cwmbran. There are plans to carry out improvements at Palc, and I'll come to those in a moment. And I think they need time and certainty to allow them to do that planning. I think that the figures, the usage figures, show that there's been significant increases in the last year or so, which have resulted from the investments at Cwmbran largely. And I think allowing a further period for them with that certainty to let the changes bed in is acceptable. What we are suggesting, though, is that 3 years in, 2019-20, there is a full review of the service fee. We have a look at it in its entirety at that point. What I've done is, in the table, though, is assumed 4.67 through to 2021-22, the end of the 5-year period, and you'll see there there would be an overall reduction if there were no change to the service fee of 335,000, just over, in that 5-year period. I'm recommending, though, that in the report that we accept the 3 years at fixed step down. It's also important, I think, to in terms of any renewal, that we look at the performance of the Trust over the 3 years that they've operated. And certainly during and I'm at section 7.3 at the moment, certainly in their first 3 years they have built up a profile. They're well known throughout the region. They've done a lot of work on their image, and they're well looked to both across the region and in Torfaen, I would say. They've also made changes in terms of the workforce, and their operations have become more commercial over those 3 years in terms of the way they operate. And that's apparent from a number of features of looking at them, and that's covered in 7.3.3. Most important, probably the most apparent thing is the amount of people who use the facility. And if you look at Table 2, that tells a story. Essentially, I've covered the 3 years of operation, which is 2013 through to 2016, and the 5 years prior, so that you get a full picture of what's happened there. And largely, if I sum it up, in largest part, they've maintained numbers. There's been small drops and increases, but largely the numbers have been retained over the years. I think the most important fact, though, is that Cumbranas in the last year has increased significantly in terms of numbers going through the door, and I think that's a result of I know it's a result of the investment that they've made in Cwmbran. In terms of Pontypool, there's also been a significant increase, and I think that's down to their methods of marketing and what have you. So overall, as you can see, if you go to the bottom, overall there's been an increase between 2014 and 15 and 2015-16 of around 200,000, which is significant. I think the other story this tells is that it takes time for investments to bed in. They've had 3 years, they've made an investment, they are now considering further investments, and it will take time for those to bed in. And I think that goes back to the argument about the step down, and allowing that step down to be retained at that level. That gives an opportunity, I think, for them to prove themselves. I think 3 years is going to be the time that we can then test that and see whether there is room to move on the step down. So overall, in terms of usage, it's looking very promising, I think. In terms of investment in the improvements, I've mentioned Cwmbran. That already in place are the replacements of the centre pitch with the 3G surface, expansion of the fitness suite, development of the soft play facility, indoor climbing facilities, and improvements to reception cafe areas. I think members have all probably seen those. Furthermore, at Cwmbran, the Trust have been successful in attracting what's called the hockey hub to Cwmbran Stadium, and that will involve resurfacing the Regra area, utilising grant. I mentioned earlier also they're proposing to invest heavily in Pontypool, and they're proposing at Pontypool to introduce a new interactive water play area, refurbished fitness suite, using the two squash courts more effectively, and improvements to cafe and creation of toddler area. So essentially they are carrying on with those improvements, and those improvements, the improvements to Pontypool will take place over the next couple of years. In terms of performance monitoring, we monitor the Trust through Schedule 1. There are performance monitoring information in there, and we do that regularly with the Trust. It appears also in my corporate performance assessment quarterly sessions that I have with you. Some of that appears, so you see the monitoring that's carried out of the Trust. So essentially there are robust performance measures in place, and we're happy generally with the way that the Trust has performed. We are proposing, though, that formally we set up meetings with the exec member, myself, the Chief Executive, and the Chair of the Trust, quarterly meetings. That doesn't happen at the moment, and I think that we need to get something like that into place, so we're suggesting that takes place in here. In terms of the support services, at the outset, setting up the Trust, you'll see at 8.3 the list of services the Council provide at a fee, at a cost. The Trust have asked for those to be renewed for the 5-year period, and we're suggesting that you go along with that proposal. In terms of, I'm on to Section 9 now, and this is the funding guarantee. I mentioned earlier the improvements that are proposed at Pontypool. They will cost in just in excess of £1 million, and the Trust have asked that the Council underwrite that. We did underwrite a £2.2 million investment in Cwmbran. We underwrote the act as guarantor, basically, for the Trust. Trust are new. They haven't built up their profile yet to be in a situation to get cheaper finance. This enabled by the Council acting as guarantor. This gives them cheaper finance that they would than they would find if they were on their own. I say the Cwmbran proposal has worked well. In given guarantee, there's always risk in there. We have checked out the proposals with their advisors, and there's always the end. If things do go terribly wrong, everything would come back to the Council in any event. We'd have the asset. So on that, I am recommending that we underwrite that request. So overall, I'm going to my conclusion now, which is section 15. I think the Trust have acted well over the last 3 years. They've built their profile up. They are showing certainly big improvements in performance in terms of people coming through the doors, and they are proposing to move forward with significant investment. Against that, the overall input to the Council is reduced by virtually £250,000. So, members, I recommend that we renew the funding agreement with the Trust. The recommendations are set out at 6.1 and reflect my beginning, where I set out what I was asking you to consider.
Right, thank you for that, Duncan. As a detailed report, the recommendations on 192, any members got a comment they want to make? I know this has been called over by our officers in detail.
I compliment Duncan on the versatility, because he turns his hand to anything these days, and I think it's an extremely comprehensive report, and I think that it proves that we did the right thing when we went to the Trust situation, because I think there's more than an element of success down there, and I think it's up to us to support it. As you said, we've discussed this at PDF and in other places, so I think that we should support this, Chairman. So I would move it.
Right, thanks for that. Any other members? If not, then all show the recommendation, please. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Duncan. The next item now then is the Home Seekers Policy Revision. Now, this is Keith. Welcome, Keith.
Adam Harper, who is actually the author of this report, and I think you would agree it's a well-written, a well-crafted report and fairly straightforward. So I'll take you through it, members. The purpose of the report is to seek approval from Cabinet to adopt a revised Home Seeker policy that, if approved, would become operational from April 2017, or slightly earlier if the ICT systems are in place. The Home Seeker policy has been was launched in 2009, has been running successfully for 7 years with partners of the Council and the registered social landlords. During 2015-16, the policy underwent a full review to evaluate whether it was appropriate, taking account of emerging legislation and changes in best practice. The policy now has a section in which relates to owner-occupiers. The revised policy will get greater flexibility to prioritise unsuitably housed owner-occupiers, and by that I think it's people who maybe want to downsize, people who need major adaptation, and those sort of areas. The policy also has a new section which refers to local connection, and in this policy only people who are resident in the borough or have a firm connection with the borough would be given the highest priority for housing, and that would bring us in line with other councils in the area. The other thing the policy takes account of course, is the changes in welfare reform, particularly for those people between 18 and 35 who will be disadvantaged under the new system. But it does give the opportunity for people to make joint applications for tenancy, so if you like, the possibility for shared accommodation. So, in conclusion then, members, the Council have operated a successful scheme for 7 years, and the revised policy responds to consultation from feedback from applicants and key stakeholders and takes account of new and emerging legislation. And I'm happy to try and take any questions.
Good, thanks for that. Gunilla?
Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Adam. I think 5.4, owner-occupiers, that's going to really impact in a big way, because I've dealt with a number of cases where people, through ill health, haven't been able to cope with their own homes, and it's been difficult through the policy as it is. So I think the wording will allow greater flexibility to prioritise and suitable accommodation. The other one, obviously, is the welfare reform, and that's going to really hit home hard, especially to our young people. So I think that, in the future, is going to prove very, very difficult. I can see we're going to have a number of one-bedroom flats being empty for some considerable time because, obviously, young people can't make up the shortfall. So that's a difficult one, but thanks for the report, both of you, and I'm sure members will support that.
Lewis Jones wants to come in.
Yes, you know, it's a matter of opinion if it's been successful or not, because for a long time we had a points-based system which was totally transparent. You know, people was only granted a property on the basis of how many points they had, and how those points were acquired was quite open and transparent. Now things altered when the points-based system was done away with and this policy came in. I get very, very many complaints that people are put in for a property, had a gold band and this and that, and then they find out they've trumped by somebody on a platinum band and so on and so on. But there's no way of trying to persuade people that they'd been dealt with properly, honestly and adequately, you know. Another issue I have found is somebody could be in very urgent medical need. I spoke to you some weeks ago about a case that a person was having to be transported to hospital for kidney dialysis, and they said if they had a bigger property they could have a dialysis machine in the property, and that case is still going on. You know, these things under the old points-based system they could have been dealt with, you know, to me more fairly and quickly. But I fully understand that all authorities are going over to either gone or going over to this kind of system. But when we overhaul them, you know, we really need to be sure they're transparent. Thanks.
Right, thanks for that. Any other members? David?
I might as well say it. It's not in relation to this policy in particular. I've just been looking for an opening, really, just to welcome seeing the Future Generations Bill filter through to our decision-making. Because Appendix 2, if you'll note, we've got the Wellbeing Impact Assessment, which basically looks at all of these policies through the prism of the Future Generations Bill, through the principles and the ways of working. And you know, it's early days, so this is the first time we've seen them in the reports throughout this agenda. But I think it's definitely an improvement on the way we're doing things. I'd quite like us to see us moving towards seeing this sort of way of working used earlier in policy making, so further down the line or earlier upstream. And I'd like to pay tribute to the officers who put all their effort into digesting the Future Generations Bill, because it is a lot to get to grips with. But officers like Rachel O'Shaughnessy, who I'd like to mention specifically because she is one of our most outstanding officers, have worked damn hard on this, and it would be good to see our way of working changing to reflect it. Thanks. Sorry, it's not in relation to the...
Thanks for that. John?
Yeah, but I'd just like to compliment the department on the way that over the last 7 years, we've engaged with the RSL. It seems to me to be an excellent partnership that seems to be working. And I don't get many complaints, thank God, but I know that when I've never seen Adam in the flesh before, but when I do ring the department, at least they cooperate with me and they answer the questions that I put forward. Don't always tell me what I want to hear mine, but I mean, that's the nature of being a councillor. But the only other thing that concerns me is the actual home seeker list that we have on this expectation for people to apply online, etc., etc. I know there are provisions to accommodate people who are not online, but sometimes I'm not sure, and I know it's been explained to them, but I'm not sure whether they understand, because I have had people saying, you know, well, I haven't got a computer, how am I going to access it? Now, I know that you do accommodate them, as long as you know about them. And that's the only problem that I have, is people can't access the home finder list, because I don't think they understand how.
In that situation, Councillor Cunningham, officers do go out and do home visits and assist.
I mean, I can comment. Obviously, Councillor Cunningham, we've spoken about this before as well. Obviously, any member of the public wishing to apply for housing, if they can't apply online, obviously normally would come into either one of the council offices or contact the team by phone, at which point we are identifying those vulnerable people around who can't use internet. But we are working in partnership with Bronavon and some of our partners as well around perhaps how we can upskill those people, because it may be that they're not able to use the internet now but may be prepared to do so. So I know Bronavon are currently trying to target those vulnerable groups around providing them access to the internet using possibly tablets and other media, and obviously supporting them, and obviously we're referring those and identifying those for support as well. So we will do all we can to make sure that they can access the system, that they understand the system, and that they feel independent in using it themselves and not relying on others.
Is that anybody else? If not, then see the recommendation show. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next item is the disposal of current Lantarnum Primary School site. I got Victor down here. Who's coming? Ah, here we are. I couldn't see you. There you are. Over to you, Victor. Carry on, yes.
Good afternoon.
It is afternoon. We've been here a long day. Go on.
And perhaps fittingly for this agenda, this report has a slight 21st century schools flavour to it. It's regarding the disposal of the current Lantarnum school site. The new site, I understand, will be ready within a few months towards the end of this year. The current site was declared surplus by Cabinet back in December last year. We've since marketed the site. We went through a two-stage process to do that. We had 6 offers in the first time around. We shortlisted 2 of them, and we asked the 2 to go through the pre-application advice process so we could just be sure about the efficacy of their offers. Following that, we then asked them to submit their best bids in light of the additional information they had received from the planning process, and the offer that came out highest and best was for £2.25 million. So that's the offer that we're recommending for acceptance by the council. The offer has some assumptions inbuilt within it. For example, the cost of demolition, which is an estimate at the moment. So if that figure changes, then the capital receipt would change either up or down, and there are a couple of other costs like that. But all the broad starting figure is £2.25 million. So the recommendations really are for Cabinet to accept this offer of £2.25 million subject to contract, and to authorise asset management and legal services to undertake the detailed negotiation and conveyance of the land. And if there are any issues that arise during the disposal, that specific delegated authority be granted to the Deputy Leader to determine those matters. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Any comments? Anybody want? Anthony?
So let's support the report. Thank Victor for his work and colleagues on this issue. And just to point out really that the money that's gained from the sale of sites like this is ploughed straight back into 21st century schools. We've seen the reports today that show some of the areas where this is being spent. I think that's important to say, because sometimes people see this as though it's a windfall for the council per se. It's not. It's the money. It's money which is put straight back into capital spending on education. I think that's very important, because unless you get receipts from sites like this, we can't provide the match funding to fund our 50% of building better schools for the future. So I'd like to thank officers for the work on this and recommend the report.
There you are. Welcome those last remarks. You are right. People don't realise, I don't think, that the money that we get from this goes back into the schools, and that's why we've been so successful in renovating and building and pushing the school programme on. Right, you see the report. Anybody else want to make a comment? If not, all agree that... Thanks very much.